On the night of February 1st, 1959, 9 experienced hikers were sleeping inside a tent high in the Ural Mountains. Outside, temperatures were dropping far below freezing, while strong winds swept across the exposed mountain. Then, sometime during the night, something happened that made all 9 hikers abandon their only shelter. They cut their way out of the tent from the inside and ran into the darkness without properly dressing themselves. Weeks later, rescuers would find the tent almost exactly as they had left it, their belongings still inside, but the 9 hikers scattered across the frozen mountain. What could have possibly made them leave? The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, an engineering student, an experienced skier from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. The expedition originally had 10 members, but one of them, Yuri Yudin, was forced to turn back after developing severe back pain. At the time, Yudin had no idea that this decision would save his life. The remaining 9 continued deeper into the northern Ural Mountains, carrying food, climbing equipment, cameras and supplies for their winter journey. They documented their trip through photographs and diary entries, and everything appeared completely normal. The group joked with each other, took pictures, and continued toward their destination, Mount Otterton. On February 1st, they encountered difficult weather and accidentally moved farther west than they had planned. Rather than returning to the forested valley, they decided to set up camp on the exposed slope of Kolatsiakl. The name roughly translates from the local Mansi language as Dead Mountain. That evening, they dug into the snow and pitched their tent on the mountainside. It was the last campsite they would ever make. Sometime during the night, something went terribly wrong. We don't know exactly what the hikers experienced, because there were no survivors to tell the story. But we do know what happened afterward. The hikers cut through the side of their tent from the inside and escaped into the darkness. They didn't stop to put on their boots or collect their warm clothing. Some left wearing only socks, while others were dressed in very little compared with what the conditions required. Their footprints showed that they moved downhill toward the forest, rather than simply scattering in different directions. That suggests they may have been trying to reach a safer location together. But whatever had frightened them enough to leave, it had not disappeared. The mountain was still covered in darkness, snow, and freezing wind. And this created the central mystery of the entire case. These weren't inexperienced hikers who had never dealt with winter conditions. They were trained mountaineers who understood the danger of cold and exposure. Yet something convinced them that remaining inside their tent was more dangerous than walking into the freezing night. The group was expected to return from the expedition, but when they failed to make contact, a search operation was eventually launched. On February 26th, rescuers discovered their abandoned tent on the slope. Inside, almost everything was still there. Their boots, their clothing, their food, their equipment, and their personal belongings. It looked as if the hikers had expected to return, but they never did. The first bodies were discovered near a large cedar tree in the forest, roughly 1.5 kilometers from the tent. Yuri Krivonischenko and Yuri Doroshenko were found near the remains of a small fire. They were poorly dressed for the conditions, suggesting they had tried to survive after leaving the tent. 3 more bodies were later discovered between the forest and the campsite. These included Igor Dyatlov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, and Rustem Slobodin. Their positions suggested that they may have been attempting to return toward the tent, but the remaining 4 hikers were still missing. They weren't found until months later, when melting snow exposed a ravine deeper inside the forest. Their bodies were found beneath the snow, along with evidence of severe injuries. The investigation had now become much more complicated. Some of the hikers had died from hypothermia, but others had suffered serious internal injuries. One had a major skull fracture, while others had severe chest injuries. Yet there was no obvious evidence of a conventional attack. There were no clear signs that an armed group had confronted them. There was no obvious explanation for why they had abandoned their tent. And the harsh environment made it difficult to determine exactly what had happened during their final hours. Some details became particularly disturbing. Parts of some bodies were missing, including eyes, and in one case, the tongue. But because the bodies had remained in the wilderness for months and were exposed to decomposition, snow, and water, these details couldn't automatically be treated as evidence of violence. Still, the unanswered questions created decades of speculation. Some theories suggested that the hikers had been attacked by the local Mansi people. Others claimed the Soviet military had been testing secret weapons nearby. There were theories involving strange lights, explosions, infrasound, and even UFOs. But none of these explanations could convincingly account for everything found at the scene. The Soviet investigation eventually concluded that the hikers had died because of an unknown, compelling natural force. And for decades, that was where the official story ended. For years, one of the simplest explanations was an avalanche. But there was an obvious problem. When rescuers arrived, they didn't find a massive avalanche sitting directly around the tent. So how could an avalanche have forced 9 people to flee? Modern researchers eventually proposed a more complicated possibility. The hikers had cut into the snowy slope to create a flat area for their tent. Strong winds could then have transported additional snow onto the slope above them. Over several hours, that additional weight may have created an unstable slab of snow. Eventually, the slab could have broken loose. It didn't need to be a gigantic avalanche. A smaller, delayed slab avalanche could have struck the tent, causing serious injuries and making the hikers believe that another slide could follow. If that happened, suddenly their strange decision makes more sense. They may have believed that staying inside the tent was too dangerous, so they escaped. They moved downhill toward the forest, planning to find shelter and return once the danger had passed. But they never got the chance. The freezing temperature, wind, and darkness turned their escape into another deadly situation. Modern scientific research has shown that this type of avalanche scenario is physically plausible, and Russian authorities later identified an avalanche as the most likely explanation. But no one witnessed the event, so the exact sequence of those final hours can never be proven with absolute certainty. The Dyatlov Pass incident has remained famous for one simple reason. The evidence tells us what happened, but not exactly why. 9 experienced hikers entered the mountains. 1 member turned back and survived. The other 9 abandoned their tent during the night and never returned. Their belongings were left behind. Their footprints disappeared into the snow, and whatever happened on that mountain was powerful enough to make them believe that leaving their shelter was their only option. Today, the avalanche explanation is considered one of the strongest explanations for the tragedy. But the mystery hasn't completely disappeared, because we will never know what those 9 hikers saw, heard, or believed in the final moments before they stepped into the darkness. Maybe there was no mysterious creature, no secret weapon, no supernatural force. Maybe it was simply a combination of snow, weather, darkness, and one terrible decision. And perhaps that's what makes the story so disturbing. Sometimes you don't need a monster to create a mystery. Nature is enough.